Wish World Part 1 RTD finale. These are always good. Myself, Neo Australia, Ingiga, England, Tyler, England, talking through Penultimate episode, season 2.
I don't think you've ever sounded quite this done in the intro.
Utterly dejected.
What did you think?
What did I think? Okay, let's... should we try saying something nice to start? Is that fair?
Yeah, okay, why not?
Yeah.
I think all the episode's set pieces are interesting. So that's, Bavaria, that's Retro Unit, that's the Bone Palace. I think all of those are quite interesting ideas. I think they're kind of well realised. Certainly the Bone Palace is a well realised set. I think great artistry, great design. It's a shame, and we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, that they were very muted and made to look, like a set, plasticky, kind of dusty, poorly lit, and that kind of detracted from the quality of that. I'm talking specifically about the Bone Palace here, of that, what was a wonderfully designed set and some great, I'm not quite sure how to refer to them, and that's part of the allure of them, the kind of droid, drone, slave, humanoid figures with the oily, kind of viscous, it was supposed to be viscous, but then obviously the Ranis touched it at one point and it clearly was rubber, so that kind of, again, that detracted from the quality of the weirdness of that. It was a kind of 90s horror gothic thing, and so was the Bone Palace, and so I really liked those ideas. I think it's a shame the Bavaria hut was not so well realised, although it looked fine, and Unit, same thing, looked fine, but these are all... to begin with, these are all interesting ideas. So that's what I would give this episode. I think its set pieces are cool.
I think the seed of this episode, the central idea of it, a reality that is held together by mass consensus, losing its corporeality because people are thinking critically, and a public that learns to overlook these lapses, so all of these smashed teacups in the bin, for example. While that's kind of an obvious idea, it's a good idea for a story. It's a pretty good idea because it says something truthful-ish about life and about how people cope with it in general. It's a little bit played out of a dystopian sort of fake world premise, but you can see the appeal of it. You can see why it stuck out and why it felt like a suitable finale idea. Okay, I think it's a pretty good idea. I think the imagery of the cup slipping through the table is a very entertaining one. I think there are lots of pieces here that belong in a good episode, certainly. That's a slightly backhanded praise, but I think that basic idea is there. I think it's just that the way it ultimately comes together, the job it's trying to do, kind of means it cannot play that idea to its potential. And in practice, I think this is the only kind of finale this season could ever have had. Because if you look, you'll notice that there's really not much of a story to conclude. Is the only way I can put it. If you look at even season 1 from last year, again, there's not much going on there with the Susan Twist shit. But at the very least, with Ruby coming to Unit with the Doctor, there's something there's a question mark about her life and how it's gonna go, where it's gonna lead, because she wants to find out what's the truth about her mum. She has all these things, this unresolved kind of tension. There's a little bit of a story set up there, and the finale is putatively a climax to that. In this case, with 15 and Belinda, so little has been going on that RTD can only mine drama for them in this story by overwriting them with completely different people. So essentially, you just have an episode, a story that could have been episode 3. It could have been episode 2. It could even have been episode 1, frankly, for all the import that the previous 6 or so episodes have on this one. I think it just feels really, really empty. It feels like a sort of the bones of a good kind of goodish fake world idea implanted in a structure where it cannot be a compelling or particularly nuanced or thoughtful storyline. And it's a shame because the ideas are good. I think the aspect of, say, the camp of dispossessed, the disabled folk, who essentially realise that they are being unseen by society at large, that's like the part of the episode where RTD is clearly writing about something he cares about in real life, as opposed to something he hopes other people care about, like all the Rani shit. And that's the distinction. I wish that good stuff was like the whole episode. So that's kind of the summary of my thoughts.
I liked...
Tension is killing me here.
I liked when we saw Insurance Unit, the kind of music Murray had there. That was pretty fun. Another thing I liked was another musical moment. It reminded me of in Space Babies, which I really didn't like on airing, and I really don't like now, but I increasingly see as kind of a Rosetta Stone to the era, because I just can't wrap my head around it, and it's so awful, and just so much of the Disney money spent on the baby mouth effect. It's just such a baffling choice. The bathroom humor, it's just such a baffling choice for a kind of first episode of the run. But all the same, it's kind of good in that it's got like, it all kind of coheres together. The speeches the Doctor makes to Ruby and to Captain Poppy and the premise of the monster, it all kind of links together in a kind of coherent whole. So I like it. I don't like it at all, and I like it less than most RTD2 episodes, but I kind of feel like it's doing the things we're complaining about a lot of these other episodes not doing, like a baseline kind of the things work together. But anyway, the moment I might like the most in that episode is towards the end when Ncuti's Doctor realizes he should be saving the monster, and it's not a good thing for the Doctor to be, it's not a good thing for the monster to be going out the airlock like an alien. A bit of Capaldi's Doctor theme, A Good Man, reprises, and I think that's a really cool way to kind of use the music to comment on and use a past Doctor's theme to kind of make a commentary on a current Doctor thing. And in this episode, it's a bit less intentional. I find it harder to work out the intent, but when 15's on the balcony and he's kind of, Omega shall be free, Big Finish audio is playing, and he's getting the flashbacks of the Doctor faces in his head, we have a bit of, there's a bit in Capaldi's theme which actually sounds very similar, but it's from the 2008 Doctor's theme, not like the show's theme, but like the theme used for the Doctor. It's from kind of the tail end of this big epic bit. And that's a really cool piece of music, and it was cool to hear it reprised. So.
I remember. The Doctor is me.
That was another thing I liked.
There's one more thing I liked, which I guess is related to the thing I said last, but I think whenever those moments happen where 15's queerness pops up in the episodes, those were the moments I kind of perked up, and I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. So to make that, like, one kind of issue you can see in this episode is that it wants to do this thing where the characters' real original selves are poking through a bit, but it can't really do that with Belinda, because, I mean, what would they even do? Like, what original personality does Belinda have to actually poke through at any point in this episode? Like, what is it? For Belinda, it becomes about the fact she doesn't remember her real life. She's forgotten it. So rather than the oppressive structures of this world, rubbing against Belinda's innate personality, it just becomes you don't remember your labour because she didn't give birth. She didn't actually give birth to that child, right? So that's why she has her meltdown. But in 15's case, it's like when he casually, remarks on like the beauty of another man, we can kind of see something that has been foregrounded with 15. Like, he had a whole romance with a man, with Rogue. And of course, Rogue actually appears in this episode. That's like the only spoilable thing in this episode, Rogue popping up on that TV screen. Amazingly, it didn't even leak. And yet, it's so humiliatingly poorly realised, it's like a bucket of cold water in the face. It's something that's meant to be fan service, but I felt like I'd been slapped. I was just instantly so heartbroken seeing how shit that looked. Like, oh my god. Rogue's return after all these weeks. After probably the last time we'll ever see him. And it's like this green screen thing that makes no sense and looks really, really bad. I can complain about that all day. But I think the whenever we've got those little moments where it's 15's actual kind of queerness, like that aspect of his personality, kind of turning the wish world into the homophobic world, I thought those were more interesting than the stuff around them. Because again, that's something from the real life, that's something from the real world. It's more pointed than all the shit about, May 24th, everyone. You can't wonder about the scooter.
I neglected to mention the disabled homeless camp, which I think is a nice idea for various reasons. Firstly, I like that it was colourful to reflect the fact that people in the camp may be visually impaired or blind. That's very astute. That's a lovely behind-the-scenes detail. It did look nice and colourful and vibrant, and the colours and the LED lights and the access requirements, I think that's beautiful. It's a nice way for Doctor Who in production to open itself up to hire disabled people to work on an episode of the show. It's quite canny use of the show's inherent openness to exploring all kinds of people and places in its stories, and therefore creating more equal access opportunities in reality with its cast and crew.
The Rogue thing I really liked in the moment because I love Rogue, and that was an actual surprise, which is always nice for leak gluttons to still get those. And it worked because it's affirming Doctor's queerness is his identity, against this dystopia. And I hate doing this, but it kind of serves the bad guys, doesn't it? Because the Rani wants him to doubt, and Rogue's saying doubt. And so Rogue's helping the bad things happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's not so bad in itself, is it? I mean, it's not really a deal breaker necessarily. Obviously, the Doctor has to regain his former personality somehow, and now he's done that, he'll be able to save the day in some epic fashion next week. So even if it does sort of serve the Rani's plans, you can still see how it's sort of a good-natured thing. I don't think it's going to come away with us hating Rogue for having contributed to this somehow.
To kind of tie it into what Tyler pointed out with the camp, I love what the characters were saying in that camp, and I was really engaged with some of Ruby being part of these outsiders, and we're going to take down God, as Shirley's saying, and I was really excited for that because that felt kind of radical, and I was really interested how are they going to play into these events. And then at the end, their plan was to look at an iPad out on the street, and then a building falls on them.
I think the fact that it's confused as to whether you should want the Doctor to doubt the world that he's in, whether that will serve the Rani or not. And then by the end, you kind of realise, right, so the fact that he was doubting was the Rani's plan all along, and then she stole him to speed the process up because the doubts of a Time Lord are inherently more interesting and aggressive than the doubts of a human. For an episode this was a similar problem. In fact, this episode is similar in so many ways. This is a similar problem that The Legend of Ruby Sunday suffered, where an episode that solely relies not on character or any kind of facet of storytelling, but on its plot in order to create hype and tension for the finale based on the plot that it's introducing. For its plot to be so flawed and confused means that it kind of becomes worthless. There's kind of nothing of worth to this story if the one thing that it's supposed to be servicing, and that's its plot, doesn't make sense. And it's not only doesn't make sense in a it's not just a gripe. This isn't just a plot hole. It's very clearly garbled. From start to finish, the idea changes, and I don't think it's a subversion of one's expectations. I think it's a failure of this. Well, I mean, this has been the case so many times throughout RTD2, hasn't it? Where You feel that with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 redrafts, edits of a script, maybe some other eyes over a script, this could have been ironed out?
I think, like, my central gripe with, the plot of the thing, it's that the premise here, which is that we've set up this world that is designed to, I guess, make the Doctor doubt it so much, make the Doctor see through it, and he can't exist within this. He's gonna break this whole thing down because he cannot possibly. The idea of this world that exists but against everything he is, basically, it pressures him to be someone he isn't. The premise of that, I guess, the logical outcome of that, the conclusion of that, I guess the thing that you naturally want to see happen from that is his breaking point, the point at which this world basically, he bursts out of this world or whatever, and that causes it all to go boom. And the thing is, the whole thing of the Rani arresting him the moment that starts to happen and dragging him up to the Bone Palace and completing that process by exposition dumping on him basically denies us anything that could be dramatically compelling about that story beat or that storyline. Like, it's sort of like, if you could have just done this, what's the point of the countdown? Like, why'd you have to wait for all of this other stuff to happen first? It does feel extremely contrived. It does feel like if you were just gonna, it does feel like a little bit of a massive waste of time, to be honest with you. Like, the story is so desperate to have this whole really quite turgid sequence of the Rani vamping it up and doing her whole, yes, we are from the constellation of Castorberus, or remember me, or my plan was so epic, and then just pass it off with a bit of a wink and a nudge, and this isn't just exposition, Doctor, it has a plot purpose. It's so desperate to do that whole full sequence that it basically interrupts the whatever kind of meaningful narrative it could have in favour of this instead, where the Doctor is so poorly served by it. Instead of a story where he is, I guess, like, driven to like some like tipping point by this world, we have one where he's just going like, "What are you talking about?" Well, he just reacts to things, just being like, no, and looking really horrified, while the Rani goes on like a 5-minute monologue. It's less dramatically interesting. It's less thematically interesting. It's less interesting. There's less story to it, and there's really very little story to it at all. And it sucks.
It's laughable. It literally was laughable. There were various points, especially in the point that you bring up of Ncuti rolling around on the floor, rolling back and forth, going no. It literally is just from start to finish. Actually, right from the beginning, I had to pause in disbelief because I was laughing at the Rani do it, breathing on people and turning them into petals and turning them into ducks and owls and doing little quips like waddle away. It really is like beyond belief what I'm watching now.
Yeah, that bit at the start, I felt like when the Rani was just quite senselessly transforming, well, killing the mother in one case, but also just transforming the kids and the dad into random entities and sort of quipping and laughing about it. I did feel like a missed opportunity to make her any kind of interesting antagonist at all. I just felt like it was really starting to lose me, because it just feels like the most generic shit you can have your big Doctor Who series baddie do. Just randomly, senselessly, like, wreck like this family in a way that's really just not actually even an interesting way of wrecking that family. She just sort of randomly, and they just sort of stand around while she just randomly picks them all off one by one and makes funny jokes about it. It's like a poorly remembered version of Missy, sort of, just like a weaker. It just feels like generic sort of piss weak Doctor Who baddie writing at this stage. Like, there's not much attempt to differentiate her at all going on there. And I think once you come full circle to the closing sequences of this episode, sort of Archie Panjabi is sort of, given that unenviable material of the whole exposition dump on the Doctor, you can see her just trying like harder and harder to keep it interesting, to the point where she's like hissing and snarling and be like, you have doubts. And it gets actually quite absurd. Like, any semblance that this is like a scientist or something like that has kind of gone out the window. It's just sort of become the generic panto gurning and mugging. It reminds me of everything people didn't like about, say, the End of Times take on the Master, for example. Like, dinner time, it's like that the Rani version of that a little bit. It just feels like the reduction again of a character who wasn't some masterpiece of a character, but certainly you had an opportunity to make her something a little bit more varied than this.
The Omega thing is odd. so the Rani kind of worshipping him, or wants to bring him back beneath the underverse, whatever this means. I feel like Omega makes a ton of sense for what Russell's been doing with all this Pantheon, God's science stuff, to bring back a character who's kind of like, he is a scientist and kind of started off the Time Lords, but he's also kind of fashioning himself like as a god. I think that character is a very organic pick to bring back from the show's past. But so the Rani is trying to summon him, and that's like the premise of the whole wish world, wish breaking stuff, is to like kind of power bringing him back. What do you think of that setup?
I think what RTD would say, in fact, I think he has said something like this, so I think this is what I'm drawing on, is that the what appeals to the Rani being a scientist about this new kind of box of tricks that the Doctor has opened up in this. There are gods, and he's. I think the Rani's line in this is that he's awoken the gods of the underverse and whatever. So I think RTD's view on that is that she's a scientist kind of through and through, and it appeals to the scientist in her to want to explore this rather than viewing it as magic, as a kind of new science. That's only, I mean, I'm purely kind of saying what RTD would say there. I don't think that's what really comes across here, because it shouldn't really in any sense come across to me like a scientist, like somebody performing experiments or using real kind of physics and biology and chemistry to bring any of these things about. It does come across more like it becomes more occultic, the things that she's doing, the way she performs to bring about. I want to say Omega because I've always said Omega, but I think this episode has canonized Omega, Peter Davison's pronunciation of the character, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, you see my point.
I think it's because RTD can't quite help himself from writing it in a mythic register all the time. So when the Rani goes, "the one who is lost," and it's capitalized in the subtitles and everything, that sort of poleaxes any effort at trying to get it to sound like a scientific process, because he can't resist putting in these phrases to make everything bang that mythos drum, or the epic, the one who is lost, the great and the holy and whatever. Like, I can see the Rani having like a scientific interest in bringing back Omega and then doing something with him or whatever that pertains to Gallifrey, because Gallifrey's been destroyed and the Time Lords have been destroyed and this and that, and she wants to you can make up all kinds of like meaningful premises to that, but the tone of it ends up being just the same old mythos wank. And I think, unfortunately, what it's going to end up being is that Omega is just like the MacGuffin, the Ark of the Covenant, the big evil blob that we're trying to stop from getting out. Which is a shame, because like you said, Neo, he's a character who is very thematically relevant. He's this being of pure will who changes form, who creates himself, he gives himself a form through sheer will. He creates universes and stuff, a bit like Conrad in this episode, who's kind of creating a world from his own thoughts. It's all quite relevant, but in this case, he really is just a big, it's like a box with lore written on it. He's like a thing on a stick, like a ball on a stick. It feels like the cheapest kind of version of this story that you could do, the one that requires the least thought or like theme.
I think this episode goes some way to showing that RTD is still a writer with lots of big, interesting Doctor Who ideas. Ideas that would work in a good Doctor Who script. You couldn't say that his initial run on the show always crystallized those ideas in a perfect way. Far from it. But what he's failed to do now in any way is siphon them into one or two kind of specific lines of thought. So now it's you've got all of these different kind of slightly incongruous ideas of the God of Dreams and Conrad being the vessel for the God of Dreams, and there being an unreal world for people to live in, and the Rani being a scientist and interested in this kind of mythos world that he's been creating over the last 2 seasons, and Omega returning, and the reality. There are lots of different ideas happening here, and I think there's disconnect between each of them, and there's certainly nothing in the script really to link any of these things, because it feels like kind of garbled nonsense. You know, it feels as though these are all kind of various things splattered across pages rather than given any time to think about or to breathe or to become anything of their own. So they all kind of end up being laughable, kind of pathetic, shoddy ideas, when in fact they could have been something interesting, something, dare I say, great.
This is a very messy, is it the episode or the season? Because it's a bit of both, the issues. So
Era.
Yeah, we've had,
it's the whole era.
We have these clip show climaxes pretty frequently now, like Story in the Engine, and this one. We've had, like last year, we had all those Character-lite episodes because Ncuti was off doing sex ed. This year, we've had a couple light on Belinda, which is an issue for a lot of reasons. I want to talk about Belinda in a second. But it's this script here is like the Doctor is like a rebel, and so he wants to remember the world as it should be, and Rogue wants him to remember, and Ruby wants him to remember, and the bad guys also want him to remember. It's kind of like a bit inert because there's no like real resistance. Everyone wants the same thing, and so the episode just kind of trudges us into the Doctor remembering through another clip show climax. And I'm just kind of, I don't really. Where was the drama there? I guess the drama is in a really weird spot, which is in that Belinda is like a really bad companion, which I'm not trying to be facetious. I do actually think that's interesting. Would Rose Tyler have given the Doctor to like the 1984 Thought Police? Would Amy? Would Clara? Would Ruby? I don't think you can imagine those characters doing it. But Belinda is in this weird kind of nun-companion status. I've seen people compare her to Dan from the Chibnall era in that she's a nice person, and there's like no reason to dislike her. Like she's a pleasant presence, but she's not quite a companion in the way that like Yaz or even Ryan or Graham were, if that makes sense. There's a weird little distinction. I just, for a companion to actually rat the Doctor out, that's like I'm not having a go at it. I just think it's an astonishingly different place to put that sort of character. This isn't, Amy remembering the Doctor so strongly she brings him back to life. This isn't like, Rose doing anything in the series 1 finale to wrest him back from the narrative, which is, fallen around him. I found that kind of interesting just because it seems so like transgressive for a companion to be such a bad companion.
My trouble with it is that it doesn't feel like Belinda is in this episode at all. It feels like whoever this is just sort of wish world Belinda, who's like happy wife and like loves her daughter and all of this. Her daughter who's materialised from thin air. And I struggle to identify anything about Belinda, specifically original Belinda, that is manifesting here. I mean, because it feels like the regular characters we know, have been mostly overwritten with reductive pastiches of themselves. So like we see Mel and Kate and Ibrahim, like all of them just kind of sitting around. And yeah, they've got maybe vague echoes of who they were. Like certainly like Ruby and Shirley are kind of written to be like their proper selves-ish, just in a new situation. But in the Doctor and Belinda's case, it's just sort of like they're doing this whole generic coupley blah-blah routine. And I think it's both the relative weakness of Belinda's character prior to this. I think the lack of investment put into giving her like a distinctive arc or like take on being a companion. The way that in seemingly every episode she's just sort of in so many episodes like an Interstellar Song Contest. So she has these inert like responses to things happening, like the Doctor. Oh, you really scared me there, Doctor. Okay, I don't actually care though. Oh, I don't trust you, Doctor. I'm not one of your adventures. Oh, just kidding. I'm fine with you, Doctor. Now I love you. She's felt like so lacking in things to call her own, an identity, that when we do a fake world story that's supposed to be strange because everything's different now, it's like, well, this is just yet another character I don't really know. I don't really know the previous one either. So I don't really feel like the impact here. So when we say like Belinda ratted the Doctor out to the authorities, I'm just like, well, I just find it hard to have this reflect on anything about who Belinda is because I don't know who the fuck Belinda is in the first place. And it just feels like it's not adding anything. See, you've talked about Doctor-lite episodes in like season 1 and Belinda-lite episodes in season 2. This episode just feels like a character-lite episode, like a characterization light one. Like, because we have no actual storyline for these characters going into the finale, we've gone with a story where, you know, we just sort of overwrite them and just have them kind of parody versions of them doing things just so they can fill time. You know? So yeah, I agree. Like, Belinda is a pretty bad companion, but I feel like in this case, like the utter kind of irrelevance of her almost, it just is reflective of her not just being like bad at the job of companion, but I think like as a script creation, I think she's suffering like extremely. Like, her plot is going to revolve around like her, I don't know, her loving her daughter who she didn't have until like 45 minutes ago. It feels like, weirdly, it reminds me a little bit of the whole Donna in the library thing with her kids being created by the computer. Like, maybe an effort to bring back some of the horror of that, Donna realizing they aren't real as they disappear underneath her. But I feel like that partially worked because we have such a strong sense of who Donna is, like, beforehand, and kind of she's so clearly defined. It just feels like everything they're trying here just isn't landing. It's
a real waste of your supporting actor to give the role of the character in the episode who tries to make the Doctor remember, who clearly sees, not clearly, not quite understanding what's going on, but kind of understands, remembers, recognises that this is not the real world, and there is another world that they should be trying to make some effort to get back to give that to Millie Gibson, to give that to Ruby, instead of to give it to Verita as Belinda, to try and play off with Ncuti with, and to you know, you could have had exactly the same thing except introduced a dynamic between Belinda and the Doctor. If Belinda in this episode is having kind of slips of the brain back to, you know, remembering who she was and who the Doctor is, and trying to make the Doctor remember and failing, and that's causing a kind of that it would go some way towards finally introducing an interesting dynamic between those characters. And then the fact that she reports him, though, just everything about that scene is funny, by the way. The way it's shot, the way it's cut after John saying he really liked the man.
Yes.
Awesome dialogue, by the way, so it looks homophobic. The fact that she reports the Doctor at all is just, it displays how little connection this Doctor Companion duo have. In any other story, as Neo's already pointed out, this would have been the point at which the key characters remember each other, or at least one of them remembers the other. The fact that the Doctor and Belinda don't like each other or know each other at all is so reflected in this. They're not friends in any sense.
Yeah. For all the kind of the other characters in this story are slotted into relationships roughly analogous to who they were before, like their unit are now running kind of friendly unit, and, you know, Kate and Ibrahim still fancy each other, all that stuff. The fact that the Doctor and Belinda are like put into a married couple is like, I think it's funny. Obviously, it's as much as it's clearly a deliberate send up of this idea of coupling people who don't go together, because specifically the Doctor is, you know, queer coded. So kind of the inappropriateness of them being a couple is clearly the point, but that is not actually played for anything because the Doctor and Belinda have there's so little with the Doctor and Belinda beforehand for that to actually feel like different or distinct. Again, it just kind of feels like we've got like just a brand new sort of Doctor and Belinda just pasted in for the purposes of this story. But yeah, I don't know. I too laugh every time he says I really liked him, and you cut straight to Belinda reporting into the police. That's a very, very funny cut.
Ruby, I don't want to, because it's so easy to go, what was the original idea here? Varada cast 2 weeks before everything started with season 2 is obviously an insane turnaround. All the Millie Gibson rumors, who knows what was happening there. Well, it's very like, it's all well and good for the tabloids to be like, there's so much drama here, there's so much bad blood. But Millie is basically in almost half the season, which kind of is that's hard to square for me. Like, this doesn't look right how season 2's working, because Belinda's so underwritten and Barada was cast so late that I feel like something's up. But also at the same time, if there was such Millie drama, why is she here like most of the time? If there's so much, I don't know how to square any of that. But all that said, Ruby and Lucky Day, I thought worked really well, and that was a story that was very kind of centered around her strongly. She doesn't really do much in this one. Like she just uses they just play on the iPad at the end before getting crushed, and then so I was disappointed with the usage here, but I wonder. I don't know if this was ever the plan at all, but if there was some version of this story thought up, conceptualized pre-Belinda, and maybe Ruby was meant to be the person John Smith was married to, I think that would have been interesting because their tighter relation. I think it would have felt more wrong for them to have this very heterosexual relationship. I think because the way they knew each other and bonded with each other. Remember how they used to describe each other as giggling schoolgirls together in the press for season 1? I just feel like there was more of a, I feel like the Doctor's queerness was more a kind of central thing in the friendship they had. And so I feel like that would have felt maybe more tangibly wrong. I mean, people were actually shipping Belinda and 15. So it feels less wrong for there to be a het relationship there. If some people are picking up, they kind of, do you know what I mean? In that sense. But also, the space babies are misidentified Doctor and Ruby as mummy and daddy. And so I feel like bringing back a space baby to be their kid just it always feels like a vestigial thing to me of whatever was going on there. It's hard to, people try and, read tea leaves about what was the plans for all this. But season 1 and season 2 were almost a back-to-back production, right? They're kind of one mega season in a lot of ways, as to our frustration, Russell was kind of saying last year. So I have trouble conceptualizing how any of this was meant to work at one point. But I just find the links to season 1 kind of interesting there. But Ruby, I thought, was pretty useless, this story. I liked her dialogue in the camp, but she didn't really do much.
I do partially think that whole thing with Ruby and the dispossessed folk, as much as they appear to have a building fall on them at the end of this week, I think that will probably be backpedaled somehow. I think next week, as much as it is supposedly a huge status quo shift here, I think probably next week will feel like more of the same, except it will segue into unit bullshit somehow. I just feel like I feel like they aren't actually finished with the dispossessed kind of disabled people. I think they will get some moment of victory over Conrad and whatnot, and that's probably what's going to happen. It's just been very protracted and dragged out because there's not much story to fill up the script with. I think with Ruby, I think that giving her the whole beat of I just need to remember. I'll be able to remember the Doctor. If I can just remember this, I can bring back the world in my memory. Does feel kind of riffing on the series 5. I remember during last year's season, I was kind of feeling well, this is kind of slightly reheated the Amy Pond stuff, isn't it? A little bit, the whole, I don't know, just the vibe of it from time to time. And here it's becoming more pronounced. I think this idea of kind of the world's gone wrong and only Amy can remember. I mean, Moffat did that twice, didn't he? In The Big Bang and Wedding of River Song. So it does feel like it's just trying to get back a little bit of that magic around Ruby. But again, she ends up just being a sort of, more of a viewpoint character for the kind of disabled camp stuff. But nonetheless, I think if you were to collapse, I guess, the various bits here, if you were to condense it, so you take Belinda out and you say Ruby was the wife instead, and Ruby still had this, I guess, subplot about trying to discover what's really going on. I don't know. Well, I'm not saying that will work, but it would probably generate more drama. It just feels like the role Belinda gets here of being the one who tragically reports the Doctor and dobs him in, that feels like the sort of role that a side character would have. I don't know, just one of those things, your tragic, sort of slightly more prominent side character who is the one who, the spanner in the works, the one who kind of lets the side down. That character.
The Adam.
I don't know. Yeah, the Adam. Yes, that's the role Belinda gets here.
The best Ruby thing, this was another moment not intended for laughs that made me laugh, is I feel like there's more episodes where Carla disowns Ruby in some twisted reality than there are episodes where she's a normal mum.
It is ridiculous how many beats in these stories feel like carbon copied from ones in previous episodes. We just think same thing happening over and over again. It's not that that's inherently a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with recurring motifs, but when they just feel like you have no other ideas, and it shouldn't feel as funny as it does. I think it's supposed to be something horrifying, but because it feels so superficially cloned from every other time this is happening, maybe it's that they're not finding new ways to do it. Michelle Greenidge as Carla pulling that same sort of intonation and expression when she's doing the exact same thing she did all the other times. It's great, oh, brilliant, this again. It's something feels careless about just the sheer repetition and like just the lack of the lack of attention to detail to not make it feel like you're literally just Control C, Control V. You know?
Did you guys detect any? I've said for a long time, I've said from the start really, that I think Millie Gibson is the best of the cast in this era of Doctor Who.
She's so good, yeah.
And I think, honestly, really every single episode that she is in, she puts in a real whopper of a performance, really memorable line deliveries, even for kind of sometimes ropey dialogue that she gets, although sometimes it is great. Did you kind of detect maybe in this instance, that she was a bit checked out, that maybe she wasn't delivering, and the stuff she was getting wasn't great, but she hasn't got great stuff in the past, and I feel that this time there was not as much. She's not trying so hard. You know, we often say of David Tennant that even when he's got a bad script, or even maybe particularly when he's got a bad script, he'll really throw everything he's got at it to make it shine. And I think Millie has always done that. But I think this time I wasn't getting any of that. I didn't feel Millie Gibson's presence as much as I felt it in other episodes. What did you guys think?
I mean, it's such a pathetic showing for her character, like for Ruby. It feels like, I mean, ironically, given all the talk of fossils, you know, her presence here feels like a relic or a vestige of something that was supposed to be good once upon a time and got completely hollowed out and gutted. Now she's just kind of lingering around the story like a ghost of something somehow. Like she's just a passenger almost in this story. She just seems to like, just being like, oh, but you don't. You're the doctor and you don't have a daughter. Sorry, bye. Something that's just like she has so little to actually like do. Like, she's just sort of numbly or like reacting to things. Like there's so little. It's not about her really in any way. There's so little that's specific about her that matters. You know, she feels like. I mean, in the scene when she's kind of with the kind of with Shirley and everyone. It feels almost like that could be bloody any companion, to be honest with you. She feels really like she's haunting a story that she doesn't have a real place in, even though her subplot is like the only bit of the episode that feels like linked to anything that matters, so it's weird. But I completely understand if she's kind of checked out here. And I see where you're coming from, like just in terms of it being like lower intensity, like lower, just... But again, I think it may partially be informed by just the kind of the sluggishness of the material.
Kind of coming off Ruby, there is something I kind of like in the episode, which is Conrad. There's a few things going on there. One is I really like. I specifically thought of you, Tyler, when Conrad's holding the wish god baby thing, and we get that throbbing sort of music. It reminded me of stuff you said you liked. I think in The Legend of Ruby Sunday. You know what, like the throbby, growly kind of thing.
I do.
I thought that sounded cool. Also, I just liked in general the weird, unsettling thing of him holding the baby and being like freaked out by it. I don't really like the mythical baby stuff because it feels very like those parts of the episode with the Rani making flower people and the sevenths. I just feels very I get the wish world thing being a product of Conrad's mind, and that feels tied into Lucky Day and like its character material because it's like denying the Doctor's queerness and stuff. And like Russell's talked heaps about the whole wish world idea in ways that I think it's interesting. Like he said, it's a partly remembered and partly invented world. Conrad's desperately inventing a whole world, so he's imagined very simple templates, put everyone into couples. Women who don't quite fit into those couples don't fit into the world. They have no role, alone, strange. But he thinks it's natural. He thinks it's normal. And then talking about, you know, John and Belinda being the happiest couple in the world. He goes to work. Traditionally, she stays at home. It's very strangely traditional, bordering on wrong pattern of behavior, very 50s. I think, well, that's quite interesting to have like this kind of chud guy, and he's trying to imagine a world being better than it is. And the camp, I think, is interesting because it's not like he's actively thinking of these people and like, oh, I wish they didn't even exist. It's just like this kind of apathetic, I don't think of them much at all. And so they kind of live in the cracks. Like, I think it's an interesting kind of look into the mind of this sort of chud in that way. So I kind of like aspects of that. I wish the episode went a bit more into So is the parts of the world he's not thinking of are like flooding and stuff? Is it like he has to be actively thinking of things to keep them stable? Or like what's going on with how parts of the world are like getting screwed up? Like South Africa.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm not sure. And I'm not entirely sure that Davies is sure, but there's a moment where when Anita Dobson comes into hand him a sandwich, he says, let's take a break, and in the meantime I'll show you images of India. And I wonder whether that goes some way to explaining what you're talking about here. Maybe that's his way of keeping everything in check, keeping everything in balance by just kind of thinking about all of these different parts and subsections and subcultures of the world. Then he can retain their existence. But I suppose the Ranis point, the Mrs. Flood's point that you're exhausted is kind of that's what's being said, that there are parts of the world being forgotten about. But then I mean, what would that even matter? Because isn't the point to destroy all of this reality and let it slip into the under universe? I don't know. Yeah, that's that. Anyway, well, that's all I had to pick up on what you'd said there regarding the Conrad's understanding of things. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that goes anywhere to explaining it at all.
I think the story is sort of has limits on how far it can explore Conrad's actual specific mentality on the world, because I think it's in a kind of vague position, because weirdly, this role of Conrad, having him create this trad wife sort of world, it feels like something that belongs more to Al from Robot Revolution, because that was something that he was very explicitly identified with, this whole idea of, missus and kind of being those kind of like traditional gender roles and stuff. Whereas Conrad's thing, even though he got that line kind of really spiteful towards Shirley and disabled people in particular, he was identified more, and they clearly kind of put that stuff in to kind of frame him as like a right-wing sort of figure. So yeah, I get it. Like it makes sense. It's not that it has no logic at all, but it does feel like a completely different change of emphasis to what Conrad's actual interests were in Lucky Day, like his overt interests about like exposing kind of government misdeeds or whatever, like this whole parapolitical kind of paranoia, this kind of anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian kind of thing that he was going on. It feels like that's kind of been jettisoned in favour of generic chud, as you said, kind of generic kind of traditional values, homophobic kind of from genericness. I would say the beat with Conrad I liked. I think it's interesting to see, well, it was amusing to see him changed kind of a little bit in that when he hugs Mrs. Flood out of sheer like weakness and like loneliness and desperation, I thought that was kind of an amusing kind of sad little beat. I think partly that worked because he's like the only character in this story, I guess, besides the Rani, who is completely persistent from who they were before this episode, if you see what I mean, because he's actually continued through, whereas everyone else has been put into these alternative lives by Conrad's wish world, obviously. So I guess seeing Conrad put on in this completely different setting, on this completely different footing, and acting in a very different way, I just felt like we were learning something new about him, whereas I didn't feel like we were learning anything about any of the other characters, if that makes sense. It's
obviously coming off his relationship with like his abusive mum and stuff. So, yeah, it's like character continuity. Yeah, I like that. What I find really interesting with this world is like, if he was more of a savage, aggressive, like chud, then I think like Shirley would be dead or like not existing at all. And we'd have this much more straightforward. This world is like a sheen of like acceptability or like morality over it, rather than like this very overt fash world where certain people are just dead or not existent. But like Shirley says in her like camp scenes, I think it's interesting, these kind of temporal gaps where it's like, I don't really want to think about that. It's more like his mind. Like, I'm not quite sure how that works. I don't really want them dead, but I don't really approve of them, so I don't really know what to do with that. I'm just not going to think about it. I think that's kind of more of a political commentary. I think it's more nuance to that than if you was just imagining him as dead. This idea of, I can't quite link up how I want to deal with that because I don't like it, but I'm not sure what to do with it. I think that feels much more like a more relevant to, I think, lots of people. I wish the episode went more into that, because I was quite interested in the Shirley stuff, and I think I just think it's more. Realistic's the wrong word, because there are overt fash people who just want all them dead, but I think it's more. I think there's more depth to Conrad's kind of, I don't quite know what to do there, so I'm just not going to think about it.
Yeah, it's more commonplace. And I think maybe in a way, could it have been even more pointed if the person doing this whole wish world generating, the person in this role, rather than someone who has been so aggressively coded as a monster, like, you know, in Lucky Day, you know, he shoots people, he manipulates Ruby, he does all these incredibly awful things, incredibly horrible. If it was someone who was presented as more or less normal, but was still nonetheless unseeing disabled people and kind of subtly imposing all these kind of oppressive statuses on all of these people, would that not be more condemning of these things that are so commonplace? Because like the casual ableism of like abled people, for example, that's something that RCD kind of highlights with them picking up on Ruby's comments, for example. Like this is something that applies to lots of people, not just overt kind of aggressive, nasty people like Conrad. So in a way, I think almost putting like an overt villain figure like Conrad in this role almost serves to, I don't know, does it blunt the critique slightly? Or is that unfair, do you think?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. If this was like Ibrahim's world or something, it would be interesting because we could like see...
Or Kate's.
Yeah, or Kate. Yeah, Kate's.
Yeah.
No, that's a great idea.
The disabled being able to understand the world more clearly from the perspective of their oppression is probably the most cogent point being made in this episode, that a group of shunned, oppressed people might understand the failures of and falsehoods of the establishment more than those who benefit from it is exactly the way of the real world. But this representation of revolution by them is kind of shallow compared to what could have been told, I think, in Lucky Day or the Song Contest, because those stories were more explicitly about institutions that mirror those of the real world, you know, military complexes and colonialist states and neoliberal entertainment institutions. This is a story with no grounding in any kind of reality. They live in a version of the world created by a childlike mind, which I'm not really sure even translates onto the mind of the man who was supposed to, of Conrad, these are almost two different characters, and it's told in the style of a children's storybook in which unnamed quote unquote god rides around on a hoverboard and lives in a spindly palace made of bones. There's no social commentary here for the disabled point to lie in, beyond maybe it was sort of bad in the 50s, wasn't it, when women had to cook and clean. That's the only real kind of commentary being made in this. And there isn't a real contemporary political discussion for the disabled revolutionaries to slot into this episode. So I think ultimately it falls flat, and I'm not sure how well it's going to be explored in the next episode, if even really at all.
And it's the fact that Shirley was originally an employee of UNIT, meaning she has the UNIT tablet. That is like the key to her being able to affect any sort of, well, I mean, we'll see if she actually affects any sort of change in the story. Certainly she doesn't manage it this far, but that's certainly her whole plan seems to pivot on having this UNIT stuff. So it's, I guess, because of like, this whole, that institution that she was part of, rather than being able to do anything like, just like with her and her group, like as they are. So I feel like it's almost not as empowering as it wants to be. I don't know.
There's weird between this and the preceding Song Contest episode. There's this kind of non-politics where obviously the Song Contest was very, like, it's drawing in the idea of political protesters, and despite the episode being written and conceived of when it was, the connections audiences make to Gaza and Israel are inescapable because of Israel's status in Eurovision for so long. We talked about that at length before. But the episode's kind of like this episode, it's being political. Like this episode has got Conrad's, traditionalist world, and then Shirley talking about, like this, the kind of resistances they can conceive of outside of that world. And then the Song Contest is being overtly political in, having the terrorism about it, and then talking about sponsorship of like evil things towards pop media like that. But like Tyler's saying, it's also like there is no real politics to it beyond like, the 50s were traditional. And I guess that
homophobia is bad.
Yeah, and that ignoring disabled people is bad. Which is like very like, I think you'll find even a lot of chuds will agree. they'll like agree to those positions. Like, I guess the 50s were sexist. And I guess some, people in wheelchairs are going through it. Like, I don't think those are particularly, like, not even radical. I don't think they're particularly, like, novel stances at all. Like, you could have done this story many, many, many decades ago, and I think it would have come across as fiery as it does or it doesn't now. So I think we're getting this kind of pattern of, like, it's that the episodes are political because they're, like, literally about politics in a lot of ways, but it's such a, like, non-politics that it just plays oddly, especially because it's just tough for me because I've seen this writer, I think, do this much more effectively. Even in, I'm not talking about Children of Earth or Miracle Day. I'm talking about even Series 1's political commentary in 2005 is a lot more critical. It's I don't see Russell doing that today. If we were somehow in 2005 again, I don't see him, like, flat out critiquing Blair and the Iraq War as overtly, and the whole WMD myth as overtly as he did there. I feel like he would step around a kind of vague, aren't politicians liars sometimes or something, like a very vague, everyone, even chuds, can kind of agree to this, rather than more of an actual stance. It just frustrates me because I don't like the cake and eat it too of, yes, this is political commentary, but it's also political commentary most people, apart from, like, really intense chuds, will agree on, which makes it kind of feel like non-political to me, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I would say something that is often said about RTD1, and particularly those Series 1 episodes you mentioned, is that they were angry. They felt angry. You can feel like a vein of anger, like, throughout in various spots. Well, I say throughout. Certainly in the early stages of RTD1, you can feel it. Maybe it ebbs away a little bit later on when you've got, like, Harriet Jones being turned into, like, this deified figure and so on. But, like, certainly at the start it's there. Whereas this, angry is not the word I would use to describe this episode or Interstellar Song Contest. I would say Lucky Day is certainly angry at some people, but I don't know if you could call it angry at all the people it needs to be angry at. It feels weirdly helpless in a way, kind of it's kind of flailing and kind of grasping at, sort of pointing the finger. It doesn't feel like there's, like, a real anger at the overall society or system or, like, world in this particular era. It feels like that has drained away. Like, there's just sort of like this really self-limiting, quite I'm just a little cinnamon roll, don't get angry at me for my opinions, quite safe approach to these kind of shallow efforts of political commentary at this point. Like, it's a very safe kind of worldview. It's a very it's just really, I'd say the scope, the scale, the emotional scope, the intellectual scope. It's funny to talk about the intellectual scope in this context, but I think it has actually it's retracted.
Yeah.
I think compared to RTD1, I think it's setting its sights so much lower, while telling itself maybe that it's setting them higher because it's throwing in more random bullshit. But I think in terms of, like, what's actually going on under the hood in these stories, it's so much less.
I want to try and contextualize that if it's possible, because I wonder whether it's really clear that RTD is a smart man, a smart, capable writer who has written excellent work and understands politics and has written political work in the past in Doctor Who and externally of Doctor Who. And I wonder whether what he's inspired by here is sex education and that type of Netflix Gen Z attracting drama, because and of course, the main selling point of this point that I'm making is that he cast Ncuti as a result of his sex education work in the hopes of garnering a Gen Z audience. And I wonder whether the making because that show does a similar thing where it will begin to kind of touch over, to kind of flirt with an overall social idea about social justice or about certain types of chuddery, or be what it may. It will begin with the shadow of an idea, and it will make a kind of a big grand statement about the kind of about the need for kind of social change, but without really making much of a without intellectualizing it in any way, without philosophizing it in any way, and actually in many cases not really creating much character drama out of the idea that it's trying to bring to light. And I wonder whether that's what RTD is riffing on, because we know for a fact that it's not really, that it almost surely is working against his instinct as a writer to subdue all of these political ideas that he's flirting with now in Doctor Who, where they were so present in the past in his previous work.
I'm of two minds. I'm not so sure, to be honest. I'm not so sure. Is it truly working against his instincts to kind of write this particular stuff that he's been writing when it comes to the politics? Because I wonder about that. Because he's displayed kind of genuine like anger towards the kind of systems and like structures and power in RTD1, and yes, that has sort of ebbed away in RTD2, but like I wonder, like, is that not, are we being too generous by assuming that this is like some sort of like this isn't what's really going on in his head? Because I mean, you know, we all saw Years and Years, we all saw that whole kind of song and dance with like horseshoe theory, dude, it's both sides, all of that kind of equivocation that was kind of happening in that show, and kind of the quite sort of neutered political message of that show compared to like Miracle Day, or the whole ending where we filmed all the bad stuff happening, that now everyone's going to stop it happening, and we've overthrown the government. Yay. I wonder if that reduction of scope is not actually just a product of who he's becoming as he ages. You know?
Yeah.
Because people do retreat into themselves, like as that happens, like as their position maybe changes, or maybe the world changes around them, and maybe they don't quite know where they fit into it anymore. Or these things do happen.
I think you're definitely right. I think you're definitely right to an extent, because I think something he's really fascinated by in season 2, but not kind of getting a handle on, is the young alt-right, the young men who are for various reasons misogynistic or homophobic, or I was going to say white supremacists, but he's not really kind of touched on that at all. But I think he's engaged with the idea of an internet cultivated alt-right, but I don't think it's not come across in any sense as though he understands it, or he understands why those people would be the way they are. And his kind of takedowns of them have been to kind of ridicule them as childish and coming from broken homes and kind of psychopaths and whatever, as opposed to going anyway to toy philosophically and intellectually with what they might represent as a cultural something that's happened as a result of something.
Part of the issue, and why I think Moffat gets these types better, is I don't think there is much of the incel inside RTD. I think I think he's pretty good at writing awful politicians, as he's done in Doctor Who and Torchwood and Years and Years and all sorts of things. I think he can put himself much better in like a spot of an authority figure that's kind of misusing their power over other people. I think he's better at kind of psychologically.
Gosh, I wonder why.
Getting what's going on there. Like, I think Stephen Moffat's quite good at getting inside the mindset of like a depraved sexist with all sorts of neuroses around women owing him things. I think he's really good at getting that and writing those sorts of characters. I just don't think it's inside RTD's head. And as imaginative as he is, I think he flattens it when he tries to get into it, rather than trying to expand into what's actually going on there.
Yeah, we've got this, I guess, ambient paranoia about young white dudes, kind of toxic young white dudes, kind of manifesting in all these ways. Like, Kid from Interstellar Song Contest could be considered another one, but like it's not really manifesting as like a sustained, like, real engagement with them. This
is completely random, non sequitur, but did you like the Ranis sonic syringe?
I actually I don't dislike the plasticky kind of look of it, with it having been designed after like some piece of medical equipment or whatever. I mean, I think generally for the most part, I don't have beef with the production design in RTD2 and stories like this. Like I think that the Bone Palace place, like, yeah, that's a really cool design based on bird anatomy and things. Those drone people with all those lenses on their head, those magnificent ornate headpieces that were designed for these characters, all black costumes, just all of that. Like the art direction, the transition from sketch concept to material kind of physical costume, all of that stuff that looks really cool, and you can see how much thought they've put into each little aspect of it. Like the syringe, the production designer guy who designed that was talking about how he factored in aspects of like the original Ranis costume into like the texture on one bit of it, and
yeah, that was so cool.
And you know, you can see each little idea of it. Like lots of love and care and passion goes into every little aspect here. So it's kind of ironic that in some cases you lose it almost completely, like those drone guys, or people, women, whoever they are. I forget what she called them, some ridiculous technobabble name that they had, like temporal whatever the hell. But like they're dressed in all black and they have this white cracked bone-like skin, and like you can see in the promo photographs for that they took on set for this episode, they stand out really well against the bone set around them. But in this episode, in the actual episode, when you look at the screen, you look at the frame, the lighting and the color grading of the whole environment is so dark and shadowy that they just disappear into it. They barely stand out at all. It looks so muted and washed out and mucky and limp. It's incredible sometimes that the amazing bit of production design just gets utterly pissed away on screen, because there seems to be no real ambition in like making it look good. Like I don't know. I just thought that some of those scenes and shots looked really pants. It
is unfortunate because there's clearly lots here that's artfully, lovingly designed, but nothing about any of this stuff was given an opportunity to shine, because in the final cut, it all had a kind of plasticky sheen and felt cold and hollow and dark and dusty, and it looked like a set. This is the thing, and you want to, when you've got such a magnificent set with such beautifully designed so these characters we're talking about, they're really fascinating, fantastic design. You want to use those to the best of your ability as a director, but I think Alex Pillai made no effort to choose interesting angles and edit his work in a way that brought out the best features of any of that stuff. And it, unfortunately, it has the appearance of a cheap, shoddy Doctor Who set, akin to something from the John Nathan Turner era of the show.
Yeah, it doesn't particularly feel like the shot choices or the way we're led into that environment is particularly interested in having us discover it or bringing out any of the wonder in that place. Like, it does look quite prosaic and flat and dull, which, yeah, like you say, it's a bit absurd. That's not the only point in the episode I felt the direction and the shot choices particularly let it down. I mean, if this stop me if this is too much of a segue, but that bit where Belinda runs away from the house because she's just been, she realised she can't remember giving birth to Poppy, and suddenly she feels like her life might be a lie. We kind of go to a shot of her like leaving the house, shutting the door behind her. It's kind of a shot from a bit far away. We see her running kind of across the frame. Then we go to these big, swooping, wide, I don't know if they were drone shots or crane shots or whatever, these really swooping landscape shots of this vast countryside that she's running across. She's very small in the frame. She's kind of running at a slightly different angle to the movement of the camera. We're kind of being swept past her as the camera moves that way. She's kind of, she feels, it doesn't feel like we're following her emotionally, is what it feels like. And as we go into this little riverside scene, that's still happening, the camera's still sweeping across, and Belinda sort of is running kind of at an angle to it, and she stops, and still very small in the frame. And it feels like as she's been going on this whole journey, we haven't been able to like see her really. We've heard obviously in the overdubbed her panting, like because she's running really fast. But when she gets there and she stops and she screams like ah, ah, I just felt like that didn't work at all, because I felt like we weren't feeling those emotions rupture out of her, because it just felt like we'd just been kind of waiting for something to happen, like not quite clear why the hell she's running like this. It just feels like the direction and the camera wasn't interested in following her emotional narrative to that explosion of a massive scream or anything like that. It just felt really, really awkward. Really, really awkward. Like, it just felt like it was disinterested in her emotional journey there. Those really vast, like, picturesque shots of the landscape. Why are you presenting it that way? This is a horrifying moment for Belinda. Why are you making it look pretty? Like, what's wrong with you? Yeah, so that was a moment I really didn't understand, like, the portrayal of it all.
I guess something I'd not even thought of until now that I'm really thinking about that scene, Gig, is that that doesn't really square her having that moment of she has a really extreme moment of doubt, and all of these pieces of crockery slip through the table, and then she goes and screams into the distance, but then she comes back, and when John Smith is having his doubts, she reports him. She doesn't have any. It's such a strange way to. There's kind of it's doing nothing with something that has just been set up. The next step that you would want to take that from as a writer is that she's having her extreme doubts about her daughter being kind of real or having ever birthed her. And then she might join in with the doctor's doubts. But the fact she kind of doubles down on, I can't allow this. I can't allow doubts in this house while Poppy's upstairs it's framed as even more absurd that she would dob him in like that.
Yeah, it's like it wants to go for a beat of big emotion, vast emotion. But I would say Belinda doesn't have enough of a real arc, like emotionally or character arc in the story for that to be something that is going anywhere in particular. I mean, maybe the idea is that going out and having a bit of a scream is how she represses all of that again, and she lets it out. She like a catharsis of all of that angst inside her. And once she's done that, she can go home and pretend everything's fine again. And maybe that's the idea. But again, it's something that I don't feel is communicated very strongly. Partly because we cut away from her while she's still mid-scream. I don't know. It doesn't feel like a completed sort of beat or like a emotional journey.
I don't want to bang this drum too much, but these are your lead actors, and these are the lead characters in Doctor Who. It's the Doctor and his companion, and for them to have turned against each other and to be taken in by the Rani, rather than you would want. I mean, a climax prior to the kind of big cliffhanger climax could and probably should have been those two, even if they don't completely realise that the world they're in is false, to come to some way towards the position that Ruby is in, for example, where they both have a moment of recognition and understanding with each other that the world they're in isn't quite right and they need to figure it out. And then you could still, all of the same things could happen. But for them to not... Belinda, it's just such a strange choice for Belinda to report the Doctor rather than for those two to share any kind of moment of friendship, like an interest, like a heroic, because they're supposed to be the heroes of this show, dynamic between the two of them.
Yeah, they don't get a moment of connection like that because this story isn't about them. The story doesn't actually give a fuck about their relationship, really, to be honest with you, or who they are, to be honest, as characters, as actual people. It is much more interesting in all this bollocks with the Rani. And I feel like and eventually, what does Belinda reporting the Doctor even lead to at the end of the day? They make a big show of arresting the Doctor and Belinda for some reason in this really cruel and violent way, police state way. But once they've done that and they bring the Doctor and Belinda to the Bone Palace, turns out, it's all part of the plan. He's just there so they can dump more law on him. And they're not actually throwing him in prison or anything like that. So it doesn't actually have much in the way of implications for their kind of fake married life than it would otherwise. I mean, either way, it just feels like it's so wrapped up in all the theatre it's doing, the kind of the empty theatre with the whole Mrs. Flood dressing up as a policewoman, doing all of that shit. It's just not got much in the way of actual story in the first place. So I think it's inevitable that it doesn't build itself around some really key story moment or emotional moment for either Belinda or the Doctor. I mean, what's Belinda doing in those final scenes at the end of the day? Occasionally she goes, "How dare you say that? I do have a daughter." So the Rani can go, "Haha, just kidding, you don't have one, it's fake." So the Rani gets to explain the plot to Belinda as well as the Doctor. That's kind of the only reason Belinda's there, I guess.
What did you guys think of Archie Panjabi as the Rani in this episode?
I think some people have been saying, "Oh, she's just doing like a Michelle Gomez thing, and this isn't the true Rani. This isn't the sacred Rani from Classic Who. They've destroyed the character." My memories of the Rani from Classic Who are watching those serials probably it would have been more than a decade ago since I've seen either of those. And what she's doing here does scan to me as riffing on them at least a bit. I know that the actress has talked about I wanted to take a bit from Kate O'Mara, but not too much. But, you know, I wanted to do nods to it while still doing my own thing. And I think she's definitely doing that. Like, I do see that as a performance, which is, I've watched the old Rani episodes, and I'm doing a little bit like that, but I'm kind of doing something else as well. But it feels very, and I'm not sure if this is the actress's fault per se. It feels very like, I think she's having a really tough job, especially at the end, because the dialogue is really, I mean, she has like the joke about exposition, but it's very chewy. There's no real, I don't think there's much of an emotional through line to anything she's, I don't think there's much of a conceptual through line. Like, I'm just baffled by a lot of what she's saying, and that I don't understand this in the way that I don't understand Davies more than I don't understand you, the Rani. And I can see the physical moves she's doing. Like, there's these sassy stances she like keeps pulling. And like, I think I buy her as the Rani, and I don't think it's quite just the master thing. I think she seems a bit more like a nerd in like her being really into her drone people and like just the way she's kind of happily exciting stuff. I do think it's a bit distinct. I think it's a pretty thankless role she's got. I think Mrs. Flood, I think Anita Dobson's having more fun as kind of the resentful one with like the connection with Conrad. I think Archie's got this tougher role, which is like, I buy her as the Rani. I just don't think it's that interesting.
Yeah, I think the bit where she flies in on her scooter and gives Mrs. Flood the sandwich meat and orders her to go make a sandwich, and sort of does all the whole plotting stuff and kind of reacts with disdain at Mrs. Flood, saying she sprang from her loins and all of that. So I would say like that bit I can sort of feel as like, yeah, okay, this is sort of a riff on original Rani, kind of mostly scans. I think that kind of whole thankless slog at the end where she's kind of vamping her way through all the exposition and being the big RTD villain, big RTD panto villain, I think that bit less so. I struggle to imagine kind of Kate O'Mara's Rani doing that whole bit quite like that. But I think kind of the impulse to just sort of vamp almost to like bloody Rachnos levels with some of the lines, kind of if that feels like a consequence of what's being given to her, like what the script is doing, like just going to all these lengths to try and make her as this kind of self-conscious big law villain who's doing the wackiest, most fucked up plan ever. Like that in itself feels like a little bit of a divergence from this whole ruthless scientist sort of persona. And I think that's why it kind of feels more homogenous. I'm not saying that she's like the Master or even like Missy, but it feels like a homogenous New Who baddie. It feels like this kind of New Who baddie just feels done before. I don't know. It doesn't feel new to me the way this is being played, even if there might be some subtle distinctions. It just feels very within the wheelhouse and like lacking in. It feels lacking in nuance to me.
There was a bit I disliked, now I remember, and this bit did feel like homogenizing with the Master and other characters, is the shipping thing of like, people said we were lovers. That just feels like you're flattening the character into being like other characters, I think. Did that work for you guys? I don't really know why Russell did that.
That felt like an attempt to bask in... I feel like such a trite nerd idiot for saying this sort of thing yet again, but it felt like a riff on Moffat. It felt like the kind of tease that Moffat would occasionally put in, like, you know, even with Missy. Like when Missy's introduced, she's saying, "Hey, my boyfriend." She's talking about the Doctor, like supposedly maybe she might be her, like he might be her boyfriend or something. And then she'll kind of say, "Oh, the Doctor gave it to me when my daughter did this." Just kind of like touches of that, and also kind of a like heterosexual, kind of heteronormative, maybe sort of a gloss on it. That also feels slightly Moffat as well, oddly enough. But I mean, you know, of course, you have Missy snogging the Doctor in Dark Water, didn't we? So it just feels a little bit influenced by all of that. But again, for that reason, it feels very over-familiar. And it just feels like, of all the things you can do with this character, you're doing like the most obvious thing. Like it's such an obvious and played out thing to do with your female antagonist. Like, oh, was she lovers with like, who cares? Like, where are all the actual interesting or novel ideas?
It strikes me as a cynical and cheap way to generate interest in the lore of this character. The fact that she comes from the Doctor's past, that she comes from classic Doctor Who, it seems to me a bit cynical is the best word for it, I think. to lend this character perhaps more credence than they really have in Doctor Who's history.
Even just like the image of we danced at the siege of Persephone with the city burning around us. Even I mean that, like, I don't know, something about that feels really weirdly like missy-coded to me. Maybe that's the wrong word, but like something. It just feels like that imagery. Something like that feels like redone, like it is rehashed from somewhere in New Who or in Moffat Who. Like somehow it feels really, really trite. I can't really put my finger on why exactly, but even just the wording of it, like the Siege of Persephone, like kind of mythic sounding location. I don't know, like whenever Moff would talk about like sort of random obscure moments in like the Doctor's history, or Missy saying something like that, it just feels like one of those things. And I don't know, it doesn't feel creative.
My big problem with Punjabi, and this isn't her fault at all, I mean, she's just cast to play the role. My big problem with her being there is that she doesn't need to be there. That's like my whole thing. I don't really understand why this couldn't have been Anita Dobson as the Rani. This is surely the reason you cast Anita Dobson in a role like this is because you want her to play at the end of it a big panto villain in a big reveal about who she was all along. And she's not doing that.
Yeah, like, as much as I did like the little bits of Anita Dobson in this episode, like her making the sandwich, kind of frustrated with her other Rani, giving her all these orders, and also her kind of cruel manner towards like Belinda when they were arresting her and stuff like that. As much as I did enjoy that, it's still a lot. I say that, given I don't actually like what the main Rani is doing in this episode, and it could be said maybe I actually like Mrs. Flood's role more, but nonetheless, like I do wish that like the more interesting of these two characters and performances was getting like that was the center of the thing, rather than in this weird orthogonal, I don't know, adjacent role that's not really adding much to the story. Again, like you say, it doesn't feel very there's no real purpose for it to be like this. It's not. I mean, RTD's been going on about how, however will the Doctor defeat 3 baddies? Oh, an unholy trinity of baddies. Wow. Like, that's such an interesting idea. So interesting that Chib did it for Whittaker's final episode. What if the Doctor was fighting 3 people at once? It's not a good idea. It's not an actual idea. It's just, it's just a random thing. You just like, it's like trying to revive, like putting those, whatever you call those electric pads in, we were trying to resuscitate someone, like shock boosters things to like someone's body, or trying to like wake them up with an injection of something like steroid or something like that. It does feel like an attempt to breathe life into a story that's got very little in the way of actual excitement to it.
The seeds, I think, have been sown for Dobson to get her big panto villain comeuppance in the finale, and in that she's got some disdain for the Rani, and that, what's that line? Snip, snip, snip. I think she's. I suspect that she will kind of lead to the end of the Rani's scheme in some way, and I hope that in that moment she gets to show how much she really can shine as an actor. But it's unfortunate because we're coming towards the end of Anita Dobson's time on Doctor Who, and she's not had really any opportunity to be the Anita Dobson that I love and was excited to know was going to be on the show.
Yeah, I wonder if you added up all the screen time that she has across the show, from Church on Ruby Road to next week's episode, like what proportion of it will just be her fucking around as Mrs. Flood in these meaningless cameos, versus her playing a character with anything to do in the story, who can openly be like a character. It's such a backwards way of putting a TV show together. Speaking
of a backwards way of putting a TV show together, so much of this episode was generated through the story was told through flashbacks. We had Ruby telling Carla and Cherry about the world as she perceived it in flashbacks, and we had the Doctor have literal flashbacks of all of his previous lives, and every kind of significant instance of what should be storytelling in this story was told in flashback moments with that kind of throbbing music Neo was talking about earlier.
Yeah, it does feel like a script that is like in structure. I mean, it's like it can't work all of those bits of the story, like Carla and Cherry rejecting Ruby. Like that can't be part of the actual story like it can only be like a quick cutaway, because the structure of the script can't like accommodate it, because it has to just have Ruby wandering around basically, just so the next bit of plot can happen to her. It feels like it's so kind of simple and crude in how it's actually playing out that it doesn't, like, it can't really, it just has to constantly divert to relevant bits of information like that, because they can't organically work themselves in. It feels like one of those shambolic, or kind of, I mean, a lot about this era feels rushed. I'm not saying the script was specifically rushed, but conceptually, it feels like it hasn't had much time in the oven, really. It doesn't feel like it's very, it's not particularly sophisticated. It's kind of doing the bare minimum. It's very bare bones sort of story playing out here. And I think the kind of the constant like recourse to cutting away to flashbacks and shit is kind of the result of that. Like, it can't, it's so locked to these few kind of moments and subplots that it can't really go anywhere else.
There's a lot here in this episode that I think over the course of this podcast we've spoken at length about the Chris Chibnall years and our problems with it, and the few things that we maybe liked about it. And there are actually quite a few instances of the work that Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker put to this show that I could point to that I thought was more artistically interesting, more mentally stimulating, that came from more of a place of creativity and nous for writing and performing than are on screen in this episode. There's very little here for me to engage with as a Doctor Who fan. It is flabbergasting. It's utterly confounding to me that this would come from Russell T Davies.
Out of interest, not to put you on the spot, but could you give an example of like a Chib and Whittaker thing that you would put over this, just to contextualize that kind of that view? Like, yeah,
I would put The Woman Who Fell to Earth entirely, in its entirety over this. I would put Spyfall over this. I would put the connection that is being suggested between the Doctor and her TARDIS in the Ghost Monument over this. I think Yaz's characterisation in Flux I would place over the character drama that's been fostered in season 2. There are quite a few instances of writing and performing that I would place over the writing and performances of all of season 2, not only this episode, but this one in particular.
I agree particularly about Yaz kind of being like superseding Belinda at this point, which, feels so insane to say, but I mean, I guess it's just kind of how this whole Belinda thing has spilled out, with her feeling so hastily patched into this show and story overall. Like, it's a tragic state of affairs.
Oh, also Sacha Dhawan. I would put Sacha Dhawan over this, over the Rani and Punjabi and Mrs. Flood.
Yeah. It pains me to agree, because I hate everything Chib did with that character, but I agree. Yeah.
Chibnall did Omega as well in a very brief shot in The Timeless Children, where there's like the trio of supposed founding Time Lords. That's meant to be Omega. So next week we'll have to see which showrunner did a better take on Omega.
Speaking of Omega, that was another thing I felt was kind of backwards. The reveal of him, like, the Doctor's like, "Who are you looking for?" And she goes, "Omega." And then they do all the whole, and then you have Conrad narrating how he was the first Time Lord, the most terrifying Time Lord of them all. That felt backwards to me. I feel like you should build up to the name reveal. You should make it clear that this is really important first, right? The first Time Lord, the most ancient, terrifying being in all of history. Then you can give him his name, because his name doesn't actually matter. He could be called like Bum, or like, I don't know. Okay, probably couldn't be called Bum, but he could be called like Zorb or Zarbi or something like that. It doesn't actually matter what he's called so much. So for them to like go Omega first, it felt anticlimactic as a reveal, I think, is my problem with it. That whole thing, when she finally said it, it didn't feel like a seismic moment that it's supposedly meant to. It felt really, really randomly like, oh, we're just saying it like that. It's just out there. She's going to go Omega, and oh right, okay, I guess it's Omega. And then we try to catch up with that by flashing the word Omega on the screen like 100 times. Like I don't know, it just felt really, really weirdly put together. And then of course you have the crap, oh god, like the big Finnish samples and stuff just playing like "Long live Omega" the moment he says that.
And Conrad's explaining who Omega is, reading off the TARDIS wiki. The Omega is the first Time Lord, the mightiest of them all. It's so bizarre, and the same thing those lines, I am the Rani, and I am the Rani. We are the Rani.
God, yeah, it was so awkward when Mrs. Flood came up and said, I am the Rani, too. like following up the whole I am the Rani with the, and I am the Rani, we bi-generated. Like, it's amazing. That really lays out how irrelevant the whole bi-generation shit is. Like, it doesn't feel like even part, it feels like a complete addendum that's had no meaningful consequence on the story. Really, like, it's insane. But, like, those Omega lines, am I misinterpreting the scene? Because it felt to me like the Doctor was actually hearing that, like Omega might be saying that from the void where he is. But is it meant to just be the Doctor remembering Omega saying those things? Is that what it's meant to be? Like just his memories coming through?
Oh.
Because that would maybe justify them being like big Finnish samples, but I wasn't sure. It felt a lot like that was, it just felt a little bit like we were meant to suddenly be hearing Omega like talking from home, wherever he is, but maybe that's completely wrong.
Yeah, I misunderstood, I think, now that you say that. I thought that was Omega kind of rising up from wherever it is in the Underverse that he is, but perhaps not.
I hope not, because I think if he's just going like, long live Omega, like the moment he appears, something like that would feel like super crap. But the thing is, that whole cliffhanger is so amateurishly done that I think does it even make a difference, I wonder. Like, when the Doctor's like, Rani, and then he's like, ah, and then he just goes to be continued. Something felt really powerfully amateurish about the way all of it's cut together. You know how in the JNT era, you'd constantly have cliffhangers where we just cut to a reaction shot of the Doctor pulling some ridiculous, like, surprised face, like raising his eyebrow, yeah. Or like if it's Sylvester McCoy or Colin Baker just looking like, because something's happened. This feels like the hyper-evolved version of that. We now have the Doctor screaming like ah as the cliffhanger just kind of like weakly sort of fade out, you know, with 0.5 second fade out and to be continued. It felt really, really like catastrophically shit. Like I couldn't believe how it's got to be one of the most amateurishly executed cliffhangers in the entire show. I swear to God. Certainly when it comes to finale cliffhangers. Like, it just felt insane. It just felt so nothingy. Like, was that it? Was that actually it?
So in that moment, the Doctor says, Poppy is real. I have a daughter. Don't you know what that means? Is it clear from this episode or indeed Space Babies or anything prior to this what that means?
No.
I mean, I dread to think what it means. Is it? Yeah, okay, that's not just me being obtuse. It's not clear yet.
Yeah.
God, oh my God almighty. I mean, fuck. Oh God. The way that this is, oh God, if we thought this episode was convoluted, let's look forward to next week.
I feel like it might just be teasing some kind of eventual crap plot device for how they're going to put all this back in the box. I don't know, because if Poppy's there, if you look at how every other character in this story has been plucked from where they usually were and then put in this scenario. So the unit people are all still a unit. You know, the Doctor and Belinda land on Earth and now they're on Earth. Poppy is like the only character who's been explicitly taken from a completely different setting, that far future baby farm or wherever it was that they went to at the end of that episode. Right, she's now been brought to present day Earth from over there. And her connection to this is that she was in an adventure with the Doctor and Ruby. So I guess maybe what that suggests is that this simulated wish world can be influenced by someone other than Conrad, because Conrad doesn't know who the hell, well, unless Ruby told him, but I feel like Conrad doesn't like care like who Poppy was specifically. So it feels like a link to probably the Doctor and maybe the Doctor. Maybe it's a sign that control of this wishy world is not strictly limited to Conrad and the Rani and all them. Like the Doctor can change things somehow. Like, I feel like it's just going to be some plot mechanic piece of whatever. I don't think it's necessarily going to reveal the Doctor is Poppy's biological father. I don't think it's going to be anything quite like that. I would hope maybe it's going in some adoption-related direction, because, you know, that was kind of a season 1 thing. It would be relevant thematically to all of this stuff. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you know, and Susan's got to be relevant somehow too. That's the bit I'm worried about.
I think RTD2, it's clear now we can say that it's very interested in babies, in birthing, and in motherhood. And maybe this is... I'm not sure entirely that I care enough to connect all the dots here. Maybe this is something our friend Oliver, who likes to make these types of connections, can help to kind of thrash out. Maybe he'll write about this one day. But I am starting to wonder about there has to be some kind of overall thesis that's being told here about babies and the fact of birth and the fact of motherhood.
I mean, I hope so. I certainly hope so. It just feels so much with all the kind of this clutching at hype and classic references and things that will make fans blow up and things that will make fandom blow up. Like, oh my god, the Ranis here. Oh my god, Omega's here. Oh my god, it's Midnight too. All of that. It just feels like the more of that you do, the less of a thesis you can even have. Like the less of a meaning you can even have behind any of it. It feels like so much of an exercise in just scrambling to stitch something together that will get clicks somehow, that maybe someone might pretend to care about. Like that, any kind of real meaning, like sincere, honest to God, point to it, kind of might start to disappear. I mean, in season 1, what was the whole thesis statement in season 1? You know, J.J. Abrams really fucked up with The Rise of Skywalker, because, you know, sometimes an ordinary life is the most extraordinary life. You know, the most trite thing you could put in Doctor Who imaginable. So if it's gonna be something on that level again, then, you know, who actually cares? You know, like maybe the quality of ideas here, even the central ideas, is not sufficient to justify the entire project.
We had an explanation of what the Vindicator was throughout the season, and who's surprised it's essentially meaningless. The line is something along the lines of, no god of wishes could have ultimate power or we'd be drowning in a universe of breast milk. It crisscrossed the universe to bring you here. To the power of a billion supernovas, the Vindicator created a web of titanic power great enough to amplify the wishes of a god. Does that make sense? I don't think it does.
Yeah, at the end of the day, saying just moving it around the universe created power.
A billion supernovas.
Just, you know, it's just complete, like, wishy-washy, like, whatever logic. You could say, like, you know, the Doctor charged the TARDIS so many times it created so much power, or the Doctor, you know, someone juggled 3 balls in the air so many times it created so much power, or like someone watched so much telly it created so much power, or someone, like, you know, posted so many tweets it created so much power. You say anything in the universe creates power, because the concept of power or energy in kind of fantasy sci-fi-ish stuff like this is so abstract and borderline meaningless. You can just say power can just come from absolutely anywhere. It's just like it's plot happening juice, you know. And it can come from anywhere in the universe, and in this case it just happens to come
from time travel, from
the Doctor moving the TARDIS around the universe, because that's what he does in the show, and we need to pretend that there was a story happening here rather than just a loosely assembled collection of images.
And for it to be an arbitrary a billion supernovas, like the 3 trillion people that triggered Doctor Who.
Yes, voiced at Bladen energy, I think is what they call it, to the power of 5. It's one of those moments where it feels like, as much as I'm not against the idea of writing technobabble that's so silly, it's funny, that's kind of loops back around to laughable because it's so absurd and knowingly absurd, but when that's kind of all you have going, then it kind of, it kind of starts to feel like you're laughing at us for watching it, rather than laughing with us for writing something that's genuinely fun and bubbly and freewheeling and clever and like endearing. You know, it's just kind of getting lost in its own empty spirals of knowing stupidity. It's hard to kind of play along. You know, it feels a little bit like that tonally. What this episode feels like at times is like if you took Sarah Jane Adventures and you removed everything about like the kids and their lives and the actual like relationship to them, like the humanity. If you took all the humanity out of Sarah Jane Adventures and just reduced it to an exercise in evoking classic Who, and just made it about like pandering to people completely outside the child demographic, just people who like really give a fuck about like Sarah Jane and K9 and things, and just made it about them, like referencing Third Doctor serials every week, but kept like the level of stuff the same, like the tonal level at the same. That's kind of what this starts to feel like. This really weird, like weirdly childish runaround that is nonetheless completely disinterested in the experience of being one of the kid viewers.
I have something to say about Ncuti.
Do it.
Ncuti wants what he wants. So the Rani is, well, on the Unleashed behind the scenes thing, he's saying that the Rani was a villain he really wanted to face. And so he asked Russell can I have the Rani in the show? And Russell said, you know, what my lead wants, my lead gets. So the Rani's in here. I think there's another thing Ncuti wanted I want to talk about in a second, but I think that's interesting. So remember how Capaldi wanted the, was it the Mondasian Cybermen he wanted and Moffat gave him?
In an episode for normal people. Yes, we remember.
Yeah, and I think it was Tennant that wanted the Zygons, wasn't it, in the 50th? And Moffat obliged.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So I love showrunners doing that. I just think it's nice when the actor, you know, has a little particular interest in one of them, in one of the villains, and so I think that's fun.
Still, we should be wary of using that as like an excuse necessarily for like the handling of the Rani. Oh, it's just Ncuti wanted it. RTD had no choice. Like, no, he had every choice in how he went on to realize that. You know, so it's still RTD's like decision at the end of the day.
The other thing Ncuti wanted, this is more of a tangent. This would like take a minute to go through, and it's less connected to this episode. It's more kind of a general thing about the season, but it's just interesting. So this kind of knits together the well and the story and the engine. And how can I put this? Not everyone gets what they want, and there's not always time to get what you want. And so I just think this is a kind of interesting thing to say. I guess I'll say it. You're a captive audience. So the Orishas we've heard about here and there. They're these West African gods that Ncuti has talked about wanting in the show. And like Russell did with the Rani, what Ncuti wants, Ncuti gets from Russell. And so Russell tried to get the Orishas into the show. In the latest Doctor Who magazine, the one that came out a couple of days ago at the time of recording, Russell's talking about, he spoke to a number of writers about Orishas, how can we get him in there? He says, back in 2022, I started work on ideas set in the year 2100. By then it said there will be vast megacities sprawling across Africa, great locations. I spoke to a number of writers about that, but it didn't quite click. And then he moves on. I spoke to a writer I was mentoring. We got to talking about what happens to the gods once mankind relocates to another planet. Since gods now exist in the universe, then who or what would they become once footfall is made on a distant world? Which is a pretty cool idea. And he talks about that for a while. And he says, we worked on that story for quite a while, and we had some books about the Orishas translated to deepen the research, but the story was working in two contrary ways. Gods of the old world on a new world. I thought that was rich, but it turned out to be shallow. We decided the story could work if it was set back on Earth, but time had moved on, and the rest of the season was coalescing around us, and I simply had too many Earth stories. The quest to get Belinda home had to feel more far-flung, so the script set aside, but it's still a good idea, kept in storage. Then he said, so there was this version of Orishas episode that didn't eventuate at all. We don't know what writer or whatever was working on there. Then he says, at the same time, I was talking to Sharma, Angel Wildfall, and I wondered if the Orishas could be part of the hostile, distant world she was conjuring up. She ended up co-writing The Well, so you can see those wild and brutal landscapes on screen. But the initial idea about the planet there was not Midnight. It was focusing on human colonists braving the elements to settle their new home. I pushed my Orisha agenda and asked, did they bring their gods with them? But the story wriggled away from us and became something new, and that's good. You should always follow the story. The adventure said, never mind gods on a new planet. What about life on a new planet? Sharma wrote a wonderful script about humans mutating under a different sun. He talks more about the interesting stuff Sharma was coming up with there. He said it was kind of an educational thing, what she was doing with the science in that episode. Very Sidney Newman, he says. That script was developed Orisha-free, but it was a very expensive CGI prosthetic script. And by that time, the script for the Eurovision episode would come in, and it demanded a lot of money. And so he loved Sharma's idea. So tender and beautifully written, but as season 2 unfolded on either side of this episode, I really wanted a tale of terror. So that script got tucked away, and we created The Well instead. So we're knitting together some other season 2 things here. And the last one is running parallel with all these attempts was a script from a man born to write the Orishas, Inua Elams. His first instinct was to pilot the TARDIS to Lagos. I thought, hooray, Orishas, ahoy. But again, they slipped through our fingers. Inua had much grander ambitions. And then he talks about how cool what he did with the gods in the story in the engine was. But Russell says there's no need for the Orishas if they're just a footnote. So they didn't end up eventuating in that episode either. And then he talks about one of the Orishas as a trickster god, and so he feels like the Doctor is a trickster god, and so the Orishas have kind of been with us all along. I just thought that was an interesting through line to kind of chart through series 2 of Russell was trying to please Ncuti in another way, and it slipped through like 3 different scenarios.
So what do you take from that? That gifting him the Rani is a kind of it was always going to be one or the other. It was always either going to be the Orisha gods or the Rani, given that those were the 2 antagonists Ncuti had requested. Do you think that's what to be read from this?
I think it would be tough to put the Orishas in something like the finale because
I don't think that's going to happen.
Russell seems to care about we need to do these guys right if we do them because it's a culture like very alien to me, and so I don't want to screw it up. And I think it's harder to jam those into like a big dramatic finale and to make them like a big existential threat. I think that's why he wanted them in like a smaller episode like Engine or Well, where you can really dig into them. And it just never kept... The writers all have their own ideas, basically, and I don't think he had a writer. Besides the one he said he was mentoring, who we kind of had the idea of the Orishas on a different gods thing, but that didn't really work either.
Yeah, a recurring theme in that extract from DWM, in that narrative as RCD relates it, is that like when, say, I think he was talking about Sharma Angel Wellfall had like a really beautifully written, rich, educational, interesting script exploring these ideas, but like there wasn't, it didn't fit into the actual logistical planning of the season, like the structure of the season, or the get Belinda home bullshit, or the money gone on Eurovision or whatever. Like at the end of the day, like dealing with these ideas properly requires like a sustained sort of commitment and kind of really getting into it and giving it, I guess, the space and room that kind of big ideas like that deserve. And it just wasn't, it couldn't be done. It wasn't, they didn't have that room, I suppose, like at the end of the day. So it didn't happen. And, I get that, fair enough. But nonetheless, it's like, I think the constraints, I think that it's always the story with Doctor Who. I think the ambitions are bigger than what they get to actually do. But yeah, nonetheless, it's like, I can't say either way whether these scrapped episodes would have been better or worse than what we got. But to be honest, it's interesting that he tried so hard over such a long period of time to get this idea to work, just because it had been suggested kind of by Ncuti, and he wanted to kind of do right by Ncuti somehow, and it was an idea that appealed to him. You can see, I'm glad that he got to realise like a story in Africa. I'm glad he actually got to do that eventually. That's admirable that he wants to kind of push the show outside of its very small little Welsh box. So yeah, I can't really hold that against him.
Neo, can I consult you on what you think went wrong directorially in this episode? Why you think, in a technical sense, perhaps, because I think, although Gig, I know that you have a good kind of understanding of TV production as well, more so than I do. That's why I put it to you guys. What kind of went wrong in terms of, we've spoken about the hollow, poorly lit looking sets. In fact, I'm not sure that we've touched on quite tinny dialogue at points. That not least in the scene with Jonathan Groff, where of course he was recorded a long time ago and now put to green screen. Do you have any kind of technical thoughts to share, either of you, on that?
It's just not very motivated, I think, the visual storytelling. Like Gig kind of unpacked with the absurdity of the Varada running out into the forest scene. I know the director talked about how the climax had to work around with showing all these characters in like this big existential threatening scenario. But I think it all falls apart because the story isn't that... it's hard to do visual storytelling if there isn't a story to tell visually. And there's no real story, I think, with what's going on with the characters at the end as the cameras... Like Gig said, the thing with Ruby and Shirley is just going to get undercut. So I don't think there's much of an existential threat there. The Doctor falling off the balcony just kind of looks hilarious. I think mostly because of Ncuti's acting. Actually, I just think that's kind of funny what he's doing there. The lighting is really frustrating because I like that Doctor Who still doesn't look like a lot of, even with Disney now, it doesn't look like most streaming television and having that like ugly gloss to it. It doesn't look all clogged up and grossly murky on screen like so many things, which I like. But if the alternative is everything just kind of looks flat and crap, that isn't great either. And Gig, I think you pointed out earlier, the maddening thing is the production design is awesome. The production design is actually really good on the show, and lots of other artistry is quite good. The costuming and the props and all these sorts of things. It's just the actual way it's getting filmed and lit really seems to let it all down. But I think in terms of the camera, a lot of it just comes down to it's hard to tell a story interesting visually if there isn't a story kind of going on in the first place, if that makes sense. Like, I think Lucky Day lends itself to visual storytelling more because there's much more of a kind of thread of deception and kind of seduction going on there. And like, remember that great Ruby scene in like the cafe of like telling the story about the Shriek and stuff? I think there's a story going on there. I mean, it had a much better director in Peter Hoare as well, but I think a lot of it just comes down to this episode isn't doing much. And so it's hard to make, it's hard to have the camera tell a story that's not really there on the page.
I mean, that moment where, I don't know if we've mentioned it already, the moment where the Rani is kind of showing off those drone-like people who have that kind of weird substance coming from their fingers into the surface of the table, the desk that they're working at, like that black pool. It's kind of like designed to kind of look almost like liquidy, kind of like smooth or something like that. And then Archie Punjabi as the Rani, while she's kind of chewing the scenery, she just gets her fingers in there and wiggles it a bit, making it very obvious just a bit of plastic, completely sucking out the illusion of that. Now, I feel like if there was, like, I guess, control on set over what they actually wanted this world to feel like and look like, that wouldn't have happened. Like, someone would have said, don't do that. Like, no, we don't want you to actually completely wreck the illusion of this prop and this character and this puppet or whatever this is by having the actor just, like, put their finger in it, jam their finger in it. Like, it's a lack of overall, like, intentionality. It's not motivated, like you said, Neo. But from another point of view, that thing with Rogue, right? Obviously, that's a completely separate shoot to this, completely different, like, time period, shot alongside Rogue. You can kind of see a brief moment of them filming it with the green screen, I think in either the Unleashed or the behind the scenes, one of those two. And I think when you look at that insert with Rogue and how shit it looks, part of that is like, it doesn't feel suited to the actual story context that he's in. Like, if he's in the Hell dimension, why does he have this, like, widescreen camera just, like, pointed at him, standing there, kind of standing some distance away from it, like, looking into it? Like, why is it framed like this? Why does it feel like this? Why is there so little sense of space around him? Like, why is there so little, like, actual atmosphere around him? And it feels like, even the nature of what he's saying in that scene, kind of so, like, detached, it feels like when they did it that early, there was, like, it feels like the people who put that together did not actually have a clear picture of how that was going to be used, what that was going to feel like, what that ought to feel like, what role that ought to actually serve in the episodes. Like, I think it just didn't feel, it just feels like they're so, like, they had little to work with. And even like Rogue, even like Jonathan Groff, like, in terms of being given this random dialogue for like a script that he knows nothing about, it feels like the ideas were so unformulated or so, like, unspecific that you get, like, this stuff that feels really amateurishly clawed in. It feels like, even though that Tables That Knew That Shit was clearly planned as early as them shooting Rogue, it feels like it was planned in some really, like, unformed way, some really loose way that led to the end result feeling like it's not super tightly wound, just feeling like they managed to scramble this together. They just barely managed to get it together. That's what it feels like to me. The
Rogue dialogue feels like, and I wonder whether, in fact, is RTD writing himself into a corner, because it was written so early on that I kind of have this image of him gesticulating about how mad and marvelous it is that he's writing tables don't do that, and what does that even mean? And he'll have to figure that out in 6 scripts time, and here it is formalized, and it doesn't quite jive with that scene that he asked Jonathan Groff to film however many months prior.
Maybe you're right. God, maybe that is actually what happened. See, I thought that when he wrote Tables Do That, well, surely he must have had that image in his head of the cup slipping through the table. But from the writer's tale, we know how last minute he leaves things. Maybe he, honest to God, just put Tables Don't Do That on a piece of paper, and he hadn't actually decided what that was. God, that actually feels possible. That's terrifying. I hadn't even considered that. That is quite terrifying, and maybe it would explain some things. If this whole script was just written backwards from the line Tables Don't Do That, bloody hell. Maybe it was. I can't even say with confidence that that's not the case.
All of Groff's lines there, by the way, are just dreadful, and Groff doesn't even give them any kind of emphasis whatsoever. It feels, somebody said that it feels like when actors like John Barrowman perform cameo scenes that people have asked him to perform. That really is what it felt like to me, and it was just kind of slotted in. Just pathetic, just a really pathetic scene. There was no point even including it.
This hell dimension is sliding into the pit. I can only send you one warning. I don't know. It's a sad last showing for this character, presumably last. I don't know. Are we meant to kind of conclude that he's actually just dead now? Because that's just there's something so viscerally upsetting about that. I think the one character and episode that was kind of a spot of hope in this era, a kind of a spot of fun, kind of love and joy in this era, and he just gets if he's actually just basically killed off in this shitty little green screen insert. That's
and his final kind of moment being Jonathan Groff non-committally going, "I miss you. In fact, more to the point, I love you." God, we've come such a long way from Bad Wolf Bay.
I love how much of the ending of this is just a countdown, even though the plan doesn't actually proceed until the Rani tells the doctor all that stuff to get him to remember. So she could have done that any time. So it's why is there a countdown to May 24th? Why? It's just a countdown for the sake of having a countdown, isn't it? You can just see how much of this episode is doing stuff just to try and give it the feel of suspense and drama and time running out and a big dramatic clock. Even though there's not actually anything happening, there's just so little happening.
It was almost offensive at points, I think. As a viewer, it feels really like I'm being talked down to, in that the story, like we've mentioned, is told through flashbacks and largely told through Conrad reading the history of Doctor Who as a kind of children's, tale. The Doctor is from Gallifrey, and the Doctor had lots of human friends, and one day something very sad happened to Doctor Who. It's not only is it laughable, it's actually kind of reprehensible.
I wonder kind of what their angle is with kind of making it a Harry Potter book, because obviously the cover of the book Conrad's holding is overtly modelled on Philosopher's Stone, original UK cover. So kind of I kind of in abstract, I sort of like the idea in a vacuum of presenting all of the the Doctor Who lore as a sort of a Harry Potter sort of opiate kind of fantasy to just sort of lull, like a bedtime story, just lull a kind of an oppressed populace into acceptance or whatever. That it kind of there's something that potentially has a bite to it almost about that. If you were to present all this Doctor Who lore crap in kind of a critical or suspicious way, then that would be kind of interesting. But of course, the story is not actually suspicious for all of this shit, because it's invoking this in a completely unironic fashion. Well, maybe that's going too far. I mean, there's certainly maybe completely unironic is overstating the case, because certainly I think there's a knowing crapness to a lot of this, but it's still trying to do this because it thinks people will actually unironically clap and lose their minds over this. It is reveling, just like Pyramids of Mars was reveling in all the Sutekh wank. I think this is still trying to indulge in the very superficial pleasure of having these law stuff drops just for the sake of it. And once the Rani, in the midst of her kind of big monologue, is doing the whole thing about how he is last Time Lord and I am the last Time Lady. Here we go. We are the last Time Lord and the last Time Lady from the planet Gallifrey in the constellation of Castorba. So by the time they're like practically padding screen time by like getting so wordy about it, it does feel fetishistic in a way that's like completely unreconstructed.
I find it a bit gross that it's so pleased with itself. I'm reminded of that line, "This isn't just exposition, Doctor. I need to tell you everything so your doubt rips open reality."
There's a trouble with the basic logic of that, isn't there? So if it's a fake world and you reveal to the Doctor that the world is fake, what does that actually have to do with doubt anymore? Like, if he remembers that he is in fact the Doctor, then he's not actually, I don't know, it just feels like the concept of doubt has kind of been sort of circumvented here, actually, because it's actually just certainty of something completely different. It just feels like the idea of doubt is like when you have something you're meant to believe and you aren't sure if you're meant to believe it. That's that destabilizing force. If you're actually entirely confident in the knowledge that this is, well, you know, it's all bullshit, then that's a slightly different thing. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like again, it's a case of this quite strong idea of doubt ultimately getting lost in the mix just because there's so much else going on, just because it has to go on, you know, for the sake of it. Yeah. Something I'm hearing about this episode in places is this idea that, well, it's just the first part of a 2-part finale, you know, it's always like this.
When have we heard that before?
You know, we can't help it, you know, the first part of the 2-parter has to just set up the plot, it's the classic problem, you know, maybe part 2 will be better, and it's like, no, that's bullshit. Like, come on. That's a load of shit. Like, the first time RTD wrote a 2-part finale, you know, both of those episodes are pretty fucking good, you know? I think, like, even with Bad Wolf revealing its premise at the cliffhanger, before then, like, that first episode still concerns an actual idea. You know, the Doctor and Rose are stuck in these homicidal future game shows, and they discover directly firsthand that these game shows have been turned lethal, and they break out of it. They meet the people behind, the people complicit in running it, and that ultimately connects with what's happening in the next episode with the Daleks, you know, killing everybody. You know, this idea, you know, it's a good first episode that leads to a good second episode, and this is to say nothing of all the times Moffat got both parts broadly right. So again, I think it's a weird excuse that people sometimes use for bad first parts. I don't know why. Like this 2-part structure has nothing inherently wrong with it. I think when you have a first part that's this shit, it's because the underlying idea is weak. I think that's the problem.
I hate 2-parter finales a lot of the time because I feel like there's one episode with a slightly long first act, and that first act becomes its own episode, which is the penultimate one, and then the finale is like its own thing after, which is why I like, well, I don't like, but I think the Wedding of Riversong has a respectability to it. I don't think Heaven Sent is part of the... I don't want to get into semantics, but I feel like they're all kind of their own thing. I feel like Hellbent is kind of its own thing in its own way as well, as a kind of standalone-ish finale. I don't want to get into that. You'll fight me, maybe. But I think the 2-parter finales that work the best are when there's a switch up intensely of the kind of story they're telling, which I think Moffat did a lot. Dark Water and Pandorica Opens. I don't think they are set up, but they're kind of their own story, somewhat separate from what the finale then does after. I hate it when it just feels like a first act, and like you're saying, we get the premise at the end, and it's like, well, would I just watch a fucking episode of then? It felt like a cold open. It felt like a 45-minute cold open to the actual idea. I hate those ones.
And which type would you consider, like World Enough in Time, or like well, that's the only other one I guess we haven't really addressed, because
World Enough's got its own. World Enough is more Bill focused, and it's doing actual stuff with Bill down there.
Yeah,
and also sometimes, and I think this applies to Bad Wolf, if the world you've invented is interesting enough, you can kind of get away with the extended first act thing, because like World Enough in Time or Bad Wolf, the actual setup and setting there is interesting enough to kind of merit this. But like we said, this Conrad world is sort of interesting, but the episode doesn't really go into as much depth of it or spend as much time on it. Like, we're trying to work out what is even the idea with the doubt premise, which kind of tells me that the world maybe doesn't justify like 45 minutes exploring it before starting the actual story.
I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't even get to 45 minutes, does it? Like, it stops exploring it so it can have like the final few minutes or 10 minutes, however long it is.
Yeah.
Be the Rani in her bone palace, like explaining the law to the Doctor and her big plan. I love the lengths they go just to set up the fact that Rani blows up the balcony. Like, you have a scene earlier in the episode where she's planting the bombs just so she can blow up. Like, I just feel like in a normal episode you wouldn't need to do. Like, you know, the Rani can just like casually detonate a bit of the balcony and drop the Doctor to his death. Like, is that such an interesting plot device that you need to like focus and zoom in on these elaborate, ornate like bomb prop things with her own animation that she's planting with her Sonic one by one in a whole scene earlier on in the episode? Like, who fucking cares? Like, blowing something up is like the least interesting thing like a Doctor Who villain can do, in my opinion. Just feels like a weird, like a weird hyper focus to a relative paucity of like story material. Again, and even like the constant banging on about everyone celebrating May 24th. I think it's because they don't really try to like identify or characterize what kind of festival this May 24th thing supposedly is. Everyone's just really excited for it just because it's a thing. Means that it doesn't even play like funny fake world dystopia dialogue the way it should. It just feels like we're just being banged over the head with May 24th because that's the day the episode aired, rather than because there's some like unique kind of amusing aspect of this world with everyone celebrating this day for no reason. Like, I don't know, it just doesn't have that oppressive like Robert Sherman kind of twisted vibe to it that I think it wants to have.
Yeah.
You know, one last thing I have to say, it's ironic that this whole episode is about supposedly the importance of doubt and how, you know, you this horrible world that suppresses doubt. Given how quickly and dramatically Belinda's doubts about the 15th Doctor at the start of the season got crushed.
Yeah, that's true.
And how she was like apologising to the Doctor for having doubted him at all. How even him torturing someone in front of her isn't enough to get her to doubt him in any meaningful way. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's not really a case of putting your money where your mouth is it?
The last thing I would say is that this really is now a show without any merit whatsoever, because where we've discussed episodes of this era of the show in the past, largely season 1, 2024, there are problems, and you know, maybe we could see problems beginning to bubble up. And then again with some of the season 2 stuff, maybe there are problems, but perhaps if you put yourself maybe into the mind of a non-Doctor Who viewer, somebody who understands TV fairly well, say even, you know, works in the TV industry, put yourself perhaps, maybe this is a more specific example, in the mind of someone who comes from RTD's world, someone who's friends with him and occasionally dips in and out of his work. If you were to watch this episode of Doctor Who with the understanding of television and the work of television that RTD has put out and what Doctor Who has been, you could not feasibly find anything to credit this episode of Doctor Who with, whether you're looking at it through the lens of its script or its performances or its character dynamics or its plot or its directorial vision. And unfortunately, you know, I really hate to say, it really pains me to say, even its music, even its compositions are weak and on autopilot. And there's very little here. There's so many flaws. There's so many flaws in it to look at. There's a point, and this isn't just nitpicking, but it's worth bringing up. There's a point at which, when the Doctor and Belinda are hugging in the Bone Palace, that the grunt that lures them in struggles to place, because he's got a helmet on, his gun back into his holster. There are so many things, like the tinny dialogue, there are so many things that really needed to have been ironed out and fixed up to create something passable to air on television on Saturday evening as under the title Doctor Who by Russell T Davies and by Bad Wolf Studios on the BBC, and none of them were serviced correctly. I think this is really, truly dreadful television.
Yeah, I say this probably is kind of the first time in RTD2 that I've actually felt this kind of bizarre, surreal, like omnidirectional fuck up that I was kind of feeling in Chib Who. Like, I was frequently kind of amazed in Chib Who how they managed to fuck up everything at once. Like it's happening again. that's really weird. I was thinking in RCD2, like they fucked up lots of things, but they didn't fuck up everything at once. But in this case, it actually feels like it's happening again, and that is genuinely bizarre. Like it has just sort of come, like tripping over itself. It's kind of staggering to this bizarre dead end. I think it's I mean, genuinely, just as television, like what is the point? It's not clear, like what like why the fuck this exists anymore. I think I think the whole Rani Omega shit, just everything about this, and just the emptiness of the overall story, it really is just an exercise in something that shouldn't be exercised. That's all I can say.
That finishes us up on Penultimate Wish World. What did you think of this one? Share everything with us. That sounds oddly commanding. Share your thoughts with us if you would like to. What did you think of the episode and our thoughts on it? Thank you very much for listening. Cheers.